An I-team investigation. It was bedlam. A year ago this month, parts of the city were rocked by rioting and looting. Stores from the Bronx to Midtown to SoHo gutted by roving mobs, taking advantage of the George Floyd protest and the pandemic. Now, the NYPD did make hundreds of arrests, but more than a year later, a great majority of the criminal cases against suspected looters have simply been dropped. Chief Investigative reporter Jonathan Dienst looked into what's not been done about those who destroyed parts of the city that night. John?
Yeah, Adam, last year the NYPD and mayor were blasted for the handling or mishandling of the mobs that ransacked parts of the city. Now, more than a year later, there are serious questions for some district attorneys about how they handled or failed to handle those charged with the rioting and looting here last summer.
Yo, free vote! Free vote!
A year ago, parts of the city were out of control. Crowds were seen smashing storefront after storefront. The mayhem continued night after night. At one point, there was even a so-called looting dance party on the streets of SoHo. The mob seemingly pillaging at will. Many were caught on tape, some with faces visible.
I took all the papers and photos off the shit.
Even posted live their own videos of their actions those nights.
Got the Rolex store.
Police far outnumbered and seemingly unprepared. But many arrests were made in Manhattan and along some commercial streets in the Bronx. Videos show how numerous locally owned Bronx stores were ransacked. NYPD data we reviewed shows 118 arrests were made in the Bronx during the worst of the looting. Since then, the NYPD says the DA and courts have dismissed 73 of those cases. 18 remain open, and there are 19 convictions for mostly lesser counts like trespassing, counts which carry no jail time.
Those numbers are, to be honest with you, excuse the word, it's disgusting.
Jessica Betancourt owns an eyeglass store which was ransacked. She is vice president of a local merchants association.
They brushed everything off to the side. What happened?
In Manhattan, NYPD data we reviewed shows there were 485 arrests. 222 cases later dropped. There are 73 convictions, many for lesser counts like trespassing. Another 40 cases sent to family court, and 128 remain open.
That's not justice. That's selective enforcement.
Law enforcement expert and former NYPD Chief of Patrol Wilbur Chapman critical of the DA's dropping so many looting and burglary cases.
If they are so overworked that they can't handle the mission that they're hired for, then maybe they should find another line of work.
Sources in the DA's offices tell us in some cases evidence was simply not strong enough for proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And with the courts closed amid the pandemic, there was a huge backlog of cases that was unwieldy for both the courts and prosecutors. The NYPD did set up a task force after the riots to examine videos to separate out suspected rioters from peaceful protesters, similar to what the FBI is doing in making arrests after the Capitol Hill riot. The NYPD says there were tedious follow-up investigations led in part by Deputy Inspector Andrew Arias, where evidence included photos and recovered stolen property.
We have to analyze each case individually and see if in fact we could prove that the right person had committed the crime.
Former Chief Chapman says while the NYPD did some follow-up, he says the data shows the DAs and the courts have not.
It allowed people who committed crimes to go scot-free.
Bronx DA Darcel Clark declined repeated requests for an interview, as did Manhattan DA Cy Vance. In an internal memo, Vance says there were over 600 commercial burglary arrests, in addition to over 3,500 unindicted felony cases in the pipeline, waiting to move forward in the courts, all on hold because of the pandemic. Before dropping a case, the memo shows his office reviewed defendants' criminal histories and whether police could really place the suspect at the scene and whether the individual caused any damage to the store. Vance told his prosecutors for many of these commercial burglaries, you will be asked to reduce the initial felony charge to a misdemeanor and to dispose of the case with an eye towards rehabilitation. And he stressed the importance of our continued goal to achieve consistency and equitable treatment in these cases. A court spokesman says decisions to dismiss cases were made by the district attorneys. An application must be made by the DA or, as they've done with hundreds of desk appearance tickets, decline to prosecute them. In the Bronx, some businesses are back, but the scars from the events of a year ago remain.
They could do it again because they know that they're not going to get the right punishment.
Other boroughs saw less looting than Manhattan and the Bronx, but in Brooklyn, for example, the number of prosecutions also seemingly low, with the DA spokesman saying to date their office has moved forward with about 20 prosecutions. So after hundreds and hundreds of arrests and follow-up investigations, it appears very few people are being held responsible for the looting that went on here 1 year ago. Adam?
Jonathan Dienst, excellent reporting. Thank you very much.